I'm Blair. Welcome to A Geezer's Perspective. Approximately 5 minutes of me sharing my odd thoughts with an audience that ranges from as few as 14 to a gobsmacking, first time I've ever used that word, 25,000 viewers. Today I want to reflect on an astonishing achievement, something I never expected. I just turned 90. I've lived in 10 decades, starting with the 1930s. I've never quite gotten used to being old. I skipped a grade early on and spent much of my life as the youngest person in whatever I was doing. That feeling has never really left me. I shared some thoughts on aging in an earlier video on this channel titled, How Old Am I? Looking back on my life and borrowing a line from comedian Stephen Wright, I have to confess, I thought growing old would take a little longer. So what can I say about being 90 that might be of interest to people younger than me? Oops, I guess that's everyone. George Burns was once accused of dating younger women. His reply, I would go out with women my age, but there are no women my age. The first thing that comes to mind is that 90 is simply an outrageous age. When I entered the workforce, retirement was a mandatory 65. No exceptions. Of course, that's changed. But in my mind, 65 still feels like the cutoff. That's old age. Another thought. When I'm having geezer talks with old pals, we always seem to agree that the years we lived through were the best. No one ever had it better. Then we snap back to reality, remembering what we actually lived through. And honestly, it wasn't always a pretty picture. War, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and a host of others. The Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the threat of nuclear annihilation, the Civil Rights Movement, riots, urban unrest, assassinations, McCarthyism, and polio. I've come to believe that every generation looks back and thinks it had the best of times. Memory tends to sweeten the good parts and blur the bad. Hard to believe, given the chaotic times we are in now. But I suspect that today's generation, when they get together, will be rambling on about how they had it best. Even if times are objectively rough, it's less about the actual events and more about how life felt. I've got a long list of changes I'm not too crazy about, but then an equally long list of positive ones. Number one on that list might surprise you. It surprises me. The smartphone. I grew up scoffing at Dick Tracy. For the young folks, that was a cartoon detective. Dick Tracy had a two-way wrist radio. Impossible, we said at the time. We'll have flying cars before that ever happens. I never imagined that one day I'd own a gadget that would be my camera, dictation device, clock, alarm, map, encyclopedia, calculator, and if I were really tech savvy, much more. Now, for the most annoying recent change, plenty to choose from, but I'll stick with a trivial one so I don't get too worked up. In my day, the Big Ten had 10 schools. Then Chicago dropped out, and they pondered a new name. They came up with, wait for it now, the Big Nine. Today, the Big Ten has 18 teams, conveniently located from California to New Jersey, a modest 5,000-mile round trip for a game. Back then, teams were mostly made up of kids from the state the school was in. Nobody transferred unless they were willing to sit out for a year. Things like NIL, the name, image, likeness payment deal going around, were unheard of. Getting caught to do essentially that would get coaches fired and schools put on probation. Student athlete may not have been 100% accurate even then, but at least it was plausible. These days, Division I sports feel more like a junior varsity for the NFL and the NBA. I'm losing interest really fast. So, how does it feel to be 90? Grateful, lucky, appreciative, all that and more.